being
So it's possible that if you were asked, if you said, look, we've got a problem in Chicago, right? We've talked about federal troops in Chicago. We need to put uniformed military surrounding polling locations in downtown Chicago. Are there circumstances in which you would approve that?
Senator, I would say this, is that during COVID, when many poll workers were unavailable, many state and local jurisdictions
But you can understand, I understand during COVID, but you can understand that when there's a trust deficit, right? When the president of the United States says we have to go after the enemy within, and that if he loses an election, it's because it was rigged, his words, that the idea that we put uniformed military surrounding polling locations, for you to not understand what that means to the American public, the playbook of authoritarianism that I've seen as a CIA officer play out over and over and over again in other countries, for you not to understand that
this may
sends
look
a shiver
like a
down
policy debate about military readiness and legal authority, but it's actually a stress test for American democracy itself. What's really being tested here is whether the United States military remains a neutral guardian of national security or becomes a political instrument in moments of domestic uncertainty. This raises broader questions about trust in leadership, the limits of executive power, and whether our institutions are prepared to resist unlawful or destabilizing orders. In this video, we'll break down how this hearing exposes the tension between command authority and constitutional restraint, why it matters for every voter, and what it tells us about the future of democratic stability in America.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Slotkin, you're recognized.
Thank you. And I join the rest of my colleagues in recognizing the 2 West Virginia guardsmen who were shot in one fatal shooting, and thank them and their families for what they've done. I guess, my questions are for you, Mr. Young. You're the #2 lawyer at the Department of Defense. You've come before this committee before. A couple of weeks ago, a couple of us here on this committee and others put out a video talking about unlawful orders, because we were getting so many people in uniform coming to us and saying, I just don't know if I'm going to be asked to do something that is illegal. I don't know how to handle that. Do you believe that any president can issue illegal orders? Is it possible for a president of the United States to issue illegal orders that the U.S. military should reject?
What we just heard is a rare acknowledgement inside a Senate hearing that presidential power has limits, even in matters of national defense. It matters because it reinforces the rule of law principle that the military serves the Constitution, not individual leaders. And it leads to a future in which every service member may need clarity, courage, and institutional backing if they are ever confronted with a command that crosses legal or democratic boundaries.
Senator, that's theoretically possible.
Okay. And, I think in the past, then Major Hegseth in 2016 said that the military has a responsibility to reject illegal orders. Attorney General Bondi last year wrote that military officers are required not to carry out unlawful orders. Can you give me an example of what would be an unlawful order of any kind?
Senator, I would say that the oath that this Congress has prescribed in 10
Just an
USC
example.
502
Just an example. Like we've prosecuted people, right, for carrying out illegal orders. So tell me is there just
in
give
that
me
example,
any example?
Senator, the one that would come to mind would be the My Lai massacre from where a young platoon leader issued that. It was not the President of the United States. As long as an order is not patently and facially illegal, it is presumed to be lawful, and service members are obligated to follow it without having to consult with the judge.
And I think the conversation that we were starting was...
This moment exposes a gray zone inside the chain of command. Most orders are assumed legal unless they are unmistakably not. That threshold matters because ambiguity can be exploited by leaders who push boundaries while avoiding explicit violations. And it leads to the uncomfortable reality that democracy depends not only on laws, but on the ethical backbone of the people interpreting them in real time.
Not because we don't trust the military. If anything, I've worked alongside the military my entire life as a CIA officer. It's that the decision makers and the words coming out of the mouth of the commander-in-chief using our cities as, quote, training grounds, those are the things. Going after, quote, the enemy within does not give us confidence that this president is going to always use the military in an apolitical way that's exclusively meant on protecting the United States. Now, you said earlier that and rightfully so, that the National Guard, of course, if they're doing missions like helping to clean up from an ice storm in Michigan, I don't think anyone questions the typical way that we use the National Guard. But for these folks who are deployed against the wishes of the sitting governor and the people of that state, you said that the troops are there to protect federal personnel, functions, and property, right? So people or functions or buildings. If you were asked to approve the placement of uniformed military on and around polling locations for a federal election in 2026, what would your legal judgment be of whether those uniforms could do that?
Senator, again, that's a hypothetical situation. There are federal laws that prohibit the stationing of troops at polling places. However, right, the question would be whether or not the degree to which that would apply in a non-federalized status under Title 32, and it would depend on the status of the personnel and the mission.
Here we see how legality can become flexible when power wants room to maneuver. It matters because elections are supposed to operate free from intimidation or state presence that could influence participation. And it leads to a future where the line between security support and political positioning could become dangerously blurred if unchecked.
Parameters that are being
So it's possible that if you were asked, if you said, look, we've got a problem in Chicago, right? We've talked about federal troops in Chicago. We need to put uniformed military surrounding polling locations in downtown Chicago. Are there circumstances in which you would approve that?
Senator, I would say this, is that during COVID, when many poll workers were unavailable, many state and local jurisdictions
But you can understand, I understand during COVID, but you can understand that when there's a trust deficit, right? When the President of the United States says we have to go after the enemy within, and that if he loses an election, it's because it was rigged, his words, that the idea that we put uniformed military surrounding polling locations, for you to not understand what that means to the American public, the playbook of authoritarianism that I've seen as a CIA officer play out over and over and over again in other countries, for you not to understand that that sends a shiver down the spine of every American, and should, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, that's why there's a trust deficit, is because there are some circumstances in which you would use the military in the middle of our democracy like that. And I continue to believe it's not our uniformed military that have a problem, it's the leaders who are directing them and these missions.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Rosen, you're right.
This is the heart of the debate. When military power appears in civic spaces, it reshapes democracy itself. It matters because trust is not just a political metric. It is the emotional core that allows citizens to believe their vote truly belongs to them. And it leads to a critical warning. If leaders normalize extraordinary power under the banner of security, America risks importing the very systems it claims to oppose abroad. This hearing wasn't just about legal definitions or hypothetical orders. It revealed the fragile balance between authority and restraint that keeps democracy stable. The integrity of our system depends on leaders who respect limits, institutions that refuse to be politicized, and a military that remains loyal to the Constitution above any individual. If America ever allows fear, power, or convenience to justify extraordinary force in democratic spaces, it will not be a moment of security. It will be a moment of loss. Accountability matters. Boundaries matter. Democracy survives only when people insist that it does. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA.